All right, guys, we have about 1 minute till, so we're going to go ahead and get started so Manny can have his full time here. Welcome to Field Crops Virtual Breakfast on April 21st here. Couple of housekeeping things. Please mute yourself during the presentations unless you're the one who's supposed to be talking. Also, please make sure that your display name is your first and last name. To get your RUP credits, we have to know you were here the whole time. So go ahead and click on the participant list, find your name, hover, click more, and then rename yourself if you need to. Finally, go ahead and ask questions in the chat box that'll be found at the bottom of your screen. Next up, all of our programs are open to everybody. The collection of demographic data from program participants is an important and mandated aspect of all Michigan State University Extension programming. This is voluntary, and the information that you provide will not be used in any way to identify you personally, but rather as an anonymous member that participated in this program. Following the RUP and CCA codes, a poll will be provided. That'll be the same one that we provided earlier. If you filled it out, great. If not, please take a moment to fill it out at that time. Today we have Dr.
Jenna.
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt here for a second. I really would like you to introduce yourself as a new member of the Field Crops team and first time hosting. We're glad to have you as part of the Field Crops team. And so give everybody a little bit of background about yourself.
Oh, sorry. My name is Jenna Thaler. I am the Field Crops Extension educator out of Huron County, covering the thumb, and I started in it November. Thank you. So next up, we will have Dr. Manni Singh talking on corn and soybean planting considerations.
Thanks, Jenna. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, let's start by looking at planting progress over the last 4 decades or so here to set the stage up on what we are talking, right? If we look at the % corn area planted before first week of May, we can see a trend line that's pretty consistent, about 20 to 25% area, right? When we look at soybeans, we are seeing this trend line going up, showing that more and more early planting is being done. Was especially true last year. You can see 40% area almost by first week of May, and even the year before, we were almost 15-20%. This year, because of the cool and wet conditions we are stuck in, it's going to be much lower than that, and we're going to probably fall below this trend line. And hopefully, some of the news that Jeff shared, hopefully will help us get started there. When we're thinking about planting, right? What are the conditions we are looking for, right? Number one factor is the optimal soil moisture. That's very critical because we do not want to be working the ground when it's wet. And that's what can cause what we call mudding your seed in. And that has implications not only this growing season, but longer term, right? Can cause sidewall compaction and non-ideal seed placement. That will have an impact on the root development, its ability to take nutrients, and will cause a potential loss in yield this year. And then longer term, we're probably causing this compacted layer below that working area, and that has long-term consequences, right? So we want to be careful looking at what's the optimal moisture that we can be working the ground, and this figure kind of shows that nicely that the potential of compaction goes high when the moisture is close to this blue line here, which is the field capacity. So you can see this shaded area here that's around the field capacity is where the potential for compaction is very high. And you can also see that it also depends on the soil texture. As we move from more coarse to fine texture soil, the moisture range where compaction can occur is changing too, right? So using a soil moisture sensor helps pretty much getting these data for us, right? But as a rule of thumb, just grabbing a ball of soil from the planting depth, that 1.5 to 2 inches, not from the surface, and see if it only deforms, that means the conditions are not right. And if it crumbles, that means we can go ahead. So very critical for us to keep an eye on. And that's where the below normal outlook Jeff was talking about is potentially going to be helpful for us. The number 2 and equally important factor is the optimal soil temperatures. right? Generally, the rule of thumb, again, is that we are looking for that around 50 degrees or so and a favorable forecast. And looks like there's going to be up and down there, but at least the next few days, we might be okay. The new genetics, I believe, is providing us more options here. The threshold, especially for soybeans, might be below 50 degrees when we talk about this imbibitional chilling injury, which is pretty much what happens when that seed takes its first sip of water, so to speak. And if it's too cold below these thresholds, it can cause a disruption in cell growth and development, and again can lead to poor emergence and uneven plant stands. You can see some of the soil temperature data here that we were on the upward trend here. Most of the southern part of the state was already getting close to that threshold a few days ago. It probably has fallen back a little bit, but hopefully, based on what Jeff was talking about, it's going to rebound here, hopefully, before coming back down again. So again, the number one management factor we will be talking about today is the planting time, right? That's what we all are thinking right now. And you can see from these data that planting time does impact yield in Michigan, probably unlike some of the I states where they have a relatively longer season compared to us. So we need to be careful about achieving those optimal planting times for us. The decline in yield with the delay in planting is not consistent. So those numbers, half a bushel to bushel decline per day, is not valid, as you can see from these response curves, which are not linear, but they are quadratic. And if we break this response down to this early, mid, and late season planting, you can see that in the early season, both for soybean and corn, and this is Michigan data, the response line is pretty flat. So we have a decent window going from end of April to early May, May 10th or so. And after that, the decline begins at a lower rate, less than typically 0.5% decline in yield for both soybean and corn. And once we are into late season, moving into June, that's when we start really seeing higher yield declines, more than 1% decline per day delay in planting. So that's what we need to be making sure that we are trying to stay away from, right? We have done a lot of work on soybean planting times, and this is data from our on-farm trials over the last 3 years, where we have more than 35 total site years showing the yield difference. So any positive number here is showing a benefit of early planting compared to the typical planting window of mid-May or so for soybeans. And you can see for the most part, we are seeing a yield benefit anywhere from 2 bushels all the way to 6 to 7 bushels by planting early in those optimal field conditions, right? But you can also see on the other side of this axis, we had this one field last year where we had a loss of almost 7 bushels. And this was one of the ultra early planted plots. Where again, we had a loss in plant stand because of those imbibitional injuries and even some of the frost events that occurred afterwards, right? So this sort of brings up this idea about, risk versus reward for early planted soybeans. There is a reward there, as my data was showing, that we do get a potential increase in yield if we plant into the right field conditions. On top of that, we are getting at least an extended planting window, right? If things get, turned downwards later on, we at least have the seed in ground. So those are the potential rewards. But in terms of risks, there are many out there. And number one is that poor germination and emergence, right? That imbibitional injury that can occur and cause poor emergence and loss in plant stand. And even once the plants are emerged, potential for freeze damage is there too, right? As we saw last year. And you can see that in a picture over here. Soybean growing point is above ground, right at the time of emergence, so it's prone to that frost damage. But here you can see that these two auxiliary buds were able to survive, and now we will have 2 branches. So we will be okay. At least in corn, the growing point is below ground until later, V6 growth stage or so. So it is protected in the soil for a while. But again, something to keep an eye on. And then crop insurance coverage is important too. You can see the Michigan map here for replant coverage. Pretty much few days from now is when those starts, and then goes into even early May for northern Michigan, right? So something to keep an eye on if we're thinking about early planting. So again, based on the research we have done, the optimal window begins towards end of April. So pretty much, I mean, right now. So hopefully the weather cooperates and we can get that started. What we typically recommend is that not planting if the forecast of rain is in the next 24 hours and the soil temperatures are relatively cool. And that's what Jeff was alluding to, that potentially might happen early next week. So we got to be careful planting ahead of a cold event that can lead to those chilling injuries that I was talking about. And then targeting fields that are suitable for early planting. Again, light texture soils, ability to drainage is important to minimize those risks, right, and potentially improving those rewards. In terms of overall, planting time considerations, again, the idea is not to choose the calendar date, but the field conditions, as I showed you. And again, planting in good conditions is important because planting in marginal conditions can lead to yield decline, not only this year, but also longer term implications. The optimal window, again, is a little bit extended for us, end of April to mid-May or so. So again, we got to be careful there, and also know that that even planting in mid to end of May can result in high yields. It's only into June when we start seeing real declines, even towards the very last week of May, if the weather cooperates, right? It's there are a lot of interactions that are at play over there. And especially if we're planting in non-ideal conditions, it's important to make sure like our plant settings and all of those things are really tuned in, because chances of making increasing that risk goes high with those uneven conditions. There has been a lot of talk about what to plant first, corn or soybean. As I showed you, the yield decline curves are pretty similar for both of those crops for us. So it comes back to the field conditions. In the rotation, which crop is coming in this year, we need to be looking at the field conditions and sort of make a plan based on that. Equipment availability comes to mind as well, right? Especially corn really prefers these uniform plant stands. Otherwise, again, if there's a difference there, those later emerging plants can pretty much act as a wheat, which soybeans are more forgiving. So if we are planting into a little bit of non-ideal conditions, I would prefer a little bit towards soybeans compared to corn, while again making sure that we are not planting into non-ideal conditions. Number two factor I want to talk about today is, again, on top of just the early planting, thinking about, do we need to change other management based on when we are able to plant, as I showed you in this curve before, right? So the thinking is that this might take more planning, but we probably have an idea about, again, based on those field histories, what fields we are able to typically plant early and which ones get delayed typically. So the idea is, if we do that, can we change this curve to something like this? How we can improve the benefits of early planting, even optimal planting, and how we can minimize losses from late planting, right? So that provides us improved profitability. Input cost is going to be critical this year, right? Where the prices are. So thinking beyond optimal planting time is probably critical. And one important factor there is how much seeds we ought to be using to get that optimal stand establishment, right? Because that's critical. That's what we are trying to do. Plant stand that can help intercept more sunlight early in the growing season, so we can make more bushels at the end of the year, right? But we got to be careful spending too much money as an input cost if the goal is to maximize profits. You all probably have seen this picture before, showing soybean plants' ability to compensate for some of these low plant stands. That as we go towards these low plant stands, soybean plant is able to branch out and compensate, right? And this kind of pretty much relates to this relation between soybean yield and soybean plant populations that we typically see, very different than what we will see in corn and in later slides. You can see as the plant population goes up, the yield goes up to a level, and then there's a long plateau there. And it takes a lot of extra plants to go from 95 to 99% yield. So something to keep in mind as we look at a little bit more data here that we have compiled based on our research over the last few years. What is the optimal seeding rate? And it changes based on the planting time. As we are moving towards later in the growing season, it changes from that 130 to 140,000 seeds to even more than 200,000 with those delayed late June planting times. But this is agronomic optimum. What is giving us maximum yield? If we look at the data that's giving us maximum economic returns using a $9 soybean price point as well as a $13 price point, you can see that at least for the early and mid-season planting, there is quite a bit of difference there. So we are putting in a lot of extra seed to just gain a little bit more yield, and it's not going to pay off at that point, except for those delayed planting conditions after early June where we do benefit. So the way I think about this is I sort of like divide this into, again, early, mid, and late season. And then think about what I ought to be doing based on those planting times. Early season, you can see that typically people are thinking about pushing to a higher seeding rate. We are not seeing that. Even in early planting, average to low stands are giving us really high yield. The stand might look ugly, but it's able to compensate and provide really high yields. And this is where seed quality is very important. So using a high quality seed with the early planting is going to be critical. Also, if we are thinking about seed treatment, these are the conditions, cool and wet soils, where a seed treatment can be beneficial, right? Compared to a mid-season where we might not benefit from that. And as we move into the late season, then we can be thinking about increasing our seeding rates there. We have also looked at the optimal seeding rate from row spacing perspective, comparing 15 and 30-inch rows in soybean. And what we are finding out, and these data shows that the response curve for the 15-inch rows to increase in population is pretty similar between the 15 and the 30-inch row spacing for early planting as well as for mid planting. So we are not able to benefit by pushing to a much higher seeding rate when we are planting in narrow rows compared to a 30-inch row spacing, just because we have more linear foot there, right? So just something to keep in mind that 15-inch rows are giving us a little bit of a higher yield potential, but the number of plants and number of seeds required to get there is pretty similar, even under early and typical planting conditions. So something to keep in mind if we are looking at different row spacings. The yield data, we are seeing benefit of narrow rows even under early planting conditions, as you can see over here. Typically, the thought process is that by planting early, we probably have an extended growing season, so we might not benefit from narrow rows. But we are seeing the response, at least over the last 2 years of our research, is consistent across the planting dates. We are getting anywhere from 6 to 8, 9% improvement in yield by planting into these narrow rows. And again, if white mold or other diseases are a concern, pushing to a lower seeding rate is probably an option along with those narrow rows there. In terms of corn seeding rate, so I have put some different yield environment response curves here. And these curves look very different compared to what I was showing you for soybeans, right? Yield improvement in corn over the last 40 years or so, increase in number of plants we are putting in a given area is one of the main drivers. I think we are putting almost 300 more seeds per year for corn, and that's contributing to that about 2 bushel or so yield increase we are seeing. And you can see from these response curves, the optimal rate is pretty much dependent on the yield environment. And this might be similar to in soybeans with those early planting scenarios. When we have high yield potential, we are pushing to a lower seeding rate. In case of corn, in these high environments, we are actually pushing to a higher seeding rate, right? For the most part, Michigan will fall into this high yield environment where we are pushing towards 200 bushels. And you can see over here, anywhere from 32 to 34,000 plants is giving us that maximum yield potential. And we ought to be adding about 5 to 10% extra to get to our optimal seeding rate based on our unique field conditions, right? The last point I want to discuss today is the optimal maturity selection for corn and soybean. Again, because of the relatively short length of our growing season, this is critical for us. And what we are finding out based on the research over the last few years is that the optimal maturity varies based on planting time. If we are able to plant early in the season before May 10th or so, we do benefit by pushing to a little bit of a later, longer season variety or a hybrid. If we are in the typical planting window, we typically have a lot of flexibility in what we select. And when we get pushed towards the later planting time, that's where switching to early maturity does benefit. And you can see in soybean data, it doesn't really impact our yield, but it impacts the quality or making sure that soybeans are mature before the frost occurs. In case of corn, there actually still a benefit of staying with a little bit of longer maturity, even with late planting. And we have been doing a lot of research on this, understanding why that's the case. And quickly, I mean, it comes down to how quickly you can reach to black layer. A hybrid planted on May 1st will take more number of each units to get to black layer compared to a hybrid that gets planted on May 30th. A phenomena that we call growing degree day compression. And that does benefit us if the plantings do get delayed. Because essentially what it means is that a hybrid that is again rated for 2,500 growing degree days is only going to take almost 2,300 if planting is delayed into end of May. So we don't need to switch our maturities as quickly as if this phenomena was not occurring. So we have a lot of data that's showing this is happening and it's a benefit to us. And a tool like this, U2U, is helpful in deciding how to spread out our maturities. We can easily enter our location, planting date, and then our relative maturity or growing degree days. And the tool will estimate when that hybrid can reach a black layer, right? It does not account for this growing degree day compression phenomena, but we can manually add those numbers in as I was showing you on the previous slide. This tool was housed on, I believe, Illinois website. They just moved it to Purdue. So there is a new link here that you ought to be looking for if you want to use this tool. So to wrap things up, again, couple of important points that we discussed. Number one is the optimal planting time is critical for us in Michigan. However, we need to make sure that we are not planting into marginal conditions, right? Especially when there is a forecast of rain along with the cool soil temperatures. That's a no-no. And it's going to depend on the field conditions. Last year, we had issues with some insect damage that Chris can allude to, probably more seed corn maggot, especially in fields where we had cover crops. So we need to make sure that we are looking for those ideal field conditions. And we can think about changing other management in addition to our planting time that can help us improve yield and reduce our input cost, right? And the number one factor there is, again, how we can get that proper stand establishment and how many seeds we need to be putting out. And what we are seeing in research is we are chasing how low we can go for soybeans without going too low and how high we can go for corn. And that can bring a variable rate seeding component into play as well, right? Just knowing the field history using yield monitor data is probably a good way to start there in terms of changing those rates within a given field even. And some of the replant decisions that I didn't have time to talk about today are critical too. In soybeans, as I was showing you in the data before, suboptimal stands can do pretty good. So we recommend actually interplanting if there's big holes in the field rather than replanting. In corn, we probably need to kill the stand that's there before we replant. Otherwise, they compete with each other. So something to think about there. And the last aspect is, again, making sure that we are spreading out our maturities, but we recommend this portfolio approach. And if nothing else, it's giving us genetic diversity, right? Because a bag of seed with a different variety name doesn't essentially mean it's different genetics. So if we spread out, if we change our maturities, that gives us more genetic diversity on our farms, and that does help. We have a lot of resources on this that are available on our website, which is agronomy.msu.edu, and I will drop that link in the chat box. And that's it.
Thank you, Manny. So next up, thank you for attending. There's all of our social media if you'd like to tune into us. And now we'll have the Q&A for Jeff and Manny and any of the other specialists we have on, if you have any questions for them as well. It looks like we have a couple questions already in the chat. So we'll start with those, but please go ahead and start dropping some questions in there to keep our specialists entertained for the rest of this session. So this one looks like it's for Manny. Mark Seaman says, it seems that our recent experience with early planted soybeans is showing that they are not very concerned about soil temperatures, but that it slows emergence timing. Do you think that soil temperature is lower on the list of important planting considerations?
All right, yeah. I was trying to type my answer, so it's probably better if I just talk about it, right? Easier that way. So yeah, that's a good point, Mark. And to me, again, soil moisture is number one. We ought to be looking for that, right? Because we have implications not only for this growing season, but soil compaction issues longer term. So that's definitely number one. Soil temperature is still a consideration. So I want to be careful saying like, okay, it's probably not important. The threshold is lower than that 50-degree that we have used for a long while. We are trying to look into some research among university and even industry folks to really pin that down. I believe that the new genetics is helping us, giving more of that early season vigor, and that's helping minimize some of the potential issues with those cold temperatures. How low that is, I don't really know the answer, but again, we don't want to be pushing it too much. I would say mid 40s probably are okay, but low 40s, definitely high 30s, we got to be careful. And another important point is it's the timing part, right? As Jeff was giving his weather forecast, if next week we're going to drop down, and if there's a rain event or the soils are cool at that time, wet, that's where we got to be careful. Those first 24 hours or so are really important for those soil temperatures. So if we can avoid seed imbibing relatively cold water in that time, that's to our benefit. But yeah, the thresholds are lower. We still want to be careful there. It does the emergence timing he was talking about. That's a bigger impact. What we have seen with our early planting research is sometimes the seed will sit in ground for 25 days or so compared to only 8 to 10 days, because it takes more time to accumulate those 100 to 120 growing degree units for the emergence to occur, right? And that has potential implications. But yeah, at least I would say that the first 24 hours are critical for soybeans, and about 48 hours for corn, where it's even more critical to achieve that even plant stand, where soybeans are a little bit more forgiving. Even if we have some loss in plant stand, they are able to compensate for that. But in corn, we need to make sure that we have that even stand that is desired to achieve those high yield potentials.
Thanks, Manny. It looks like the next one is up to you as well. With the cooler than normal temperatures coming to take us through the rest of the month, will soil temps continue climbing? And should seed treatment plans be changing based on the medium range outlooks that Jeff indicated?
Yeah, so I can start there, and maybe Jeff can answer how the soil temperatures are going to respond. They have more buffering capacity, right? So we are looking for soil and not air temperatures. And it will take more cool air for them to drop down. And again, your soil type, if the soil is wet or cool, that also plays a role, how quickly soil temperatures will move. But this point about seed treatment is important. Again, just I was talking about before, with the early planting, we have longer window before emergence occurs. So the seed is sitting there and exposed to these non-ideal field conditions for a longer time. We have done work on seed treatment where we do see benefit of improvement in plant stand when we plant early compared to later planting days. It did not result in yield increase for us, but again, to me, seed treatment is a field specific management decision. And if there is a history of pest pressure in that field, early season seedling diseases, seed treatment is a good insurance policy to go, especially just for those early plantings. As we move into the mid-planting times, we probably are okay, right? So it's probably a good strategy to keep that as an insurance policy. And I will also add that we have seen that increasing the seeding rate doesn't really benefit with the early planting, especially if we have a seed treatment on, because it does help with the improvement in plant stand. So I can think from both of those managements, right? What seeding rate I ought to be using, and do I need to be using a seed treatment? Because the goal is the same, that we are trying to achieve more uniform and relatively high plant stand. So using both a higher seeding rate and a seed treatment might not be beneficial, and sticking with a seed treatment with a relatively lower rate might help us maximizing our profits. Jeff, you want to add anything on the soil temperature part?
I would. It is a tricky thing, and I actually was just responding to a text here. It is one thing I would recommend. If I can share a screen here off of EnviroWeather, something that is useful, that I think you will find useful. Do you see my screen again?
Yep.
Okay. One way of at least looking at this, and I think it might have been Paul that just mentioned this, and the soil temperatures have been running low, obviously, for this time of the year, lower than we'd like for this time of the season, mostly in the 30s and 40s. What you see here is a product on EnviroWeather, our EnviroWeather site, enviroweather.msu.edu. This is for East Lansing, our flagship station on campus. And what you're looking at here in red on the top, this is a mediagram of the last week, so last 7 days, Friday through today. The red is the air temperature at 1.5 or at 5 feet above the ground. And then the green here, I've clicked on the 2-inch soil temperature. And it's really interesting to watch these two. The soil temperatures are more complicated than the air temperatures, at least in terms of what's impacting those. But you have many days like yesterday where we had cloudy skies and the soil temperatures remain lower during the day than they would have otherwise. But you also have days here like Saturday and Sunday of this past weekend where we had good sunshine. The sun heats the soil up, and you can see that the soil temperatures jump quickly above the air temperatures. And so we've got it. And of course, the amount of moisture in the soil also influences how warm or how cold. The drier the soil is, the larger the swings we see in that 2-inch soil temperature. The warmer in the day, cooler at night, and vice versa if we have lots of water in the soil. So again, thinking about the forecast, this is a tricky one because they're going to jump this weekend, especially if we hit 80 with sun. Those 2-inch temperatures are going to be way higher than they've been so far this year. But given the outlook, it's very, very likely that this is temporary. And once we do get the cold air to come back early next week into the middle of next week, they're also going to fall back down again. So there's certainly that risk. So they do change rapidly at this time of the year, especially given the cloud cover and the moisture content.
Jeff, is there ever a time when soil temperatures don't move quite as much? Or is it just because we're early in the season, we have more change in the temperatures of the soil?
Yes, as we move into the middle part, certainly into the growing season, the soil down below, we get the heat builds up finally, and we just don't see there's a difference, of course, between the air and the soil temperature, but also between the soil that's below our rooting zone. And once that warms up, we tend to see much smaller changes on a daily basis once we move into the growing season. So this is a very highly variable and noisy time of the year for soil temps, unfortunately. And again, one of the times when it arguably is one of the most important times of the growing season, it's complicated.
And yeah, I would add, your field history is going to be a factor there on top of the soil texture and the soil moisture content, right, Jeff? If we have residue on the
Yes.
field, and if the field is no-till, it probably will take more time for those soil temperatures to respond compared to if the field has a lower amount of residue and or is a chisel plot or something back in the fall. And those might be the fields where we are targeting relatively early planting, thinking from that perspective, because the warming potential is there, right?
Absolutely. The more residue, the more reflection we get off the top, and usually the longer it takes for those soils to warm up in the spring. I did see also, I think Clay asked a question regarding a forecast source, and this is a great question. I don't know though, and this is a really interesting question. I do not know of a source that forecasts it, and I think some of it because it is so complicated. I don't know of anything available. I wish that were the case, which is another reason why we look at these real-time data. I think that's one of the best things we have, at least to see where it is and where it's been over the last couple of days. But again, for a forecast, unfortunately, I'm not aware of anybody that does this on a regular operational basis. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question, Jeff. I mean, I think we ought to be looking into this. I bet all the environmental stations, they have probably quite a variability in terms of soil texture that they're recording, right? So there might be some data in there that someone can potentially look into going into future as these variable planting conditions become more of a norm here, right? So really good comment there that we can look into.
Jeff, Eric was curious how long the legacy EnviroWeather platform will be available to use before we'll only have the new version.
That and I don't know if Keith Mason is on here today, but that is we're in completing this modernization, and one of the last steps to get everything over. It is going to be ended, but I don't know the exact date that's scheduled. Keith, if you're available, if you could supply that, that'd be great. But it is ultimately going to be ended as well. That the legacy site.
Doesn't look like we have any other ones in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and throw one at you, Manny. You indicated about how there is the phenomenon of growing degree day compression going on. Are there any hard, fast rules, whatnot, that can help people decide if they're going to be a little bit later planting, what kind of growing degree day compression to expect?
Yeah, it's pretty good question. And again, we can spend an hour just talking about that. Jeff and I have been trying to get into the bottom of this. You can see my slide here, right?
Yes.
So pretty much, it does occur. That's what we know as a certainty. I would say Bob Nielsen down at Purdue looked into this in late 90s. And their number was for every day delay in planting after May 1st, it's about 7 growing degree days on a daily basis. So if you're planting May 30th, it's 30 times 7, about 200 less growing degree days. Make sense? And the idea is, again, when a seed company is rating these hybrids, they are rating for optimal planting, which again, down in I-States, it's pretty much that first week of May, right? So that's like sort of the gold standard, about 7.4 number that Bob Nielsen found out. What we are finding out here, you can see down here, it's about 5.6 was our average across these different hybrid maturities. It did change. The compression was more if we were using a longer or a late maturing hybrid. Very similar to what Bob Nielsen was finding out, and that's probably true because they're using longer hybrids compared to us over here, right? But it was a little bit shorter for our relatively short maturing hybrids. So you can see our average is not too far off from theirs, and it does exist. But again, we need to collect more data. I believe there's a lot of variability here. It goes back to why the plant decides to shut down and get to black layer, right? And 2019 was a good case study for us because of the delayed plantings, right? And it wasn't really occurring there because of a relatively warm fall weather we had. So again, there's a lot of interacting factors there. The real basic rule of thumb I can talk about, to probably keep this answer short, is that it does occur if the planting gets delayed towards end of May. That does benefit us, right? But if we are into June, or I would say even the last week of May, we got to be thinking about switching. This compression phenomena help us hedge against switching those maturities, right? And that was pretty apparent in our yield data over here that looked different to soybeans. So it's giving us benefit, but we probably at this point, we need more data to really dig deeper into the environment piece, how those fall weather conditions are going to change the amount of compression we are going to get. And I believe it's important for us, right? Because again, we are chasing that endpoint, trying to mature before the first frost occurs. And the additional data, we are collecting a lot of data. I don't know if Jeff wants to talk about this. The phenomena, the dry down phenomena too. Once we get to black layer, we have made our yield, but how about the field dry down? And where energy costs are going into future, right? That might be more important than with the low energy prices, the field dry down part, right? So we are collecting more data there, and hopefully we're looking into developing this tool that can help growers not only determine when they will get to black layer, but when they will get to a field harvest moisture, that 25% or so that we are chasing. Anything you want to add into this, Jeff?
No, I think you just the fact that, of course, the earlier that happens and the warmer the air temperatures tend to be climatologically, and the more drying potential that we have. So if you delay that, you just increase the risk that the rate of field drying is going to be less than it would have been otherwise. And of course, your situation of having to wait too long or having higher moisture than you'd like to at harvest, it becomes more of a risk.
Well, thank you. And seeing as we don't have any more questions in the chat right now, we'll go ahead and wrap it up a whole minute early, give it back to everybody of their day. If you have any questions for any of our specialists who are on today, feel free to reach out to any of us who are on here, either in Extension, your local agents or your specialists, and we can all get you in contact with the right person. So thank you everybody for attending. And Phil, if you don't have anything else, we'll let everybody go.